Hello, welcome to ITAM IQ. My name is Keith Rupnik, co-founder and president. Today I'm going to talk to you about two of our certification courses for managing cloud assets. The two courses are Cloud Asset Management, or CAM, and the second one is SaaS Asset Management. Now, Cloud Asset Management includes all three of the most popular cloud architectures: software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. And the other certification course only addresses SaaS, or software as a service, asset management. In each of these slides, you're going to see in the top right corner two triangles, one with the word CAM in it, the other word SASM, or SaaS Asset Management. That means that the content of this slide applies to both courses. The majority of these slides apply to both courses. You'll just see a few that are CAM only. So let's talk about the cloud architecture that I just mentioned earlier. You have infrastructure as a service. Now, infrastructure as a service is a third-party vendor providing to its customers infrastructure or things like basically hardware related that you would see. So the network, servers, air conditioning and cooling, power or energy, and network. And that is the bare bones that is provided as an option for their customers. Sitting on top of IaaS is PaaS, or PaaS, or platform as a service. So we layer on top of infrastructure, operating systems, middleware, databases, things like that, enabling or allowing the customer to build applications quite easily and frequently. And time to market is actually very well enhanced by the adoption of cloud. Now, on top of those two layers, we find finally SaaS, or software as a service. Think of this as an application offered over the internet. And that is things like Office 365 would be a perfect example of a SaaS application. Remember again, CAM addresses all three of these layers, while SASM addresses only the SaaS layer. So why is there a need for this new ITAM subdiscipline? Well, let's look back at what there currently is. At the top you have ITAM. So the IT Asset Manager is the individual that has oversight of the entire ITAM program. And they're the interface to executive management. They work across the entire organization. Reporting up to ITAM is SAM, or Software Asset Management. Their focus is on, of course, software assets. Licensing is a subdiscipline, so you will find license asset managers potentially that are specific to, say, Oracle or Microsoft, and they're also managing spend. Now we move over to HAM, or Hardware Asset Management. Now, software asset management really cannot succeed without hardware asset management. But hardware asset management, they focus on, of course, the hardware: desktops, laptops, servers, networking equipment, any printers, anything that is traditionally a hardware asset. Now we enters in cloud asset management. And cloud asset management is focused on managing the cloud service provider. Of course, they're looking at spend just like all the other disciplines. And they were also about controlling cloud sprawl, because cloud sprawl is one of the challenges that many organizations are facing today, where people just go out and buy and acquire whatever they need. Now, as a sub-discipline of CAM, of course, is SaaS. So if somebody's just focused on software as a service asset management, then that certification works really well for them. Let's look at some of these numbers that people are experiencing right now. 2023, $525 billion. 2027, the estimated at $881 billion. That's according to Statista. Moving to the cloud improves business reliance. Cloud Zero and Aberdeen studies showed that. Migrating to the cloud reduces carbon emissions by a whopping 84%, which makes a lot of sense because they're consolidating data centers. Cloud costs are higher than expected, according to 6 out of 10 organizations. That was part of a survey from Cloud Zero. I mean, think about that. 60% of the people that you may be working with or talking to are spending more than they actually estimated. And my prediction, it's going to get actually even worse. 75% of organizations report an increase in cloud waste. So now we're talking 3 out of 4 people that you know or organizations you know that they have waste. They probably just don't know why or where it's occurring. Over half of enterprises are struggling to see a return on investment. Again, according to a survey by CloudZero and PricewaterhouseCoopers. This makes a lot of sense because I pretty much can guarantee you that organizations were not managing their data centers very well to begin with. And now you move all these assets off of their property, they're going to have an even more difficult time. 7 out of 10 companies aren't sure what they spend their cloud budget on, according to the CloudZero survey. 95% of companies have concerns over this. They don't know what they don't know, and what they don't know is a significant amount of information. Thus the reason why these courses were developed. So CAM, Cloud Asset Management, delivers value. And value is defined by cost savings, plus reduced risks, plus efficiencies, plus compliance, plus usability. I want you to really look at this equation here because some people may pick one of those things or 2 of those things to focus on. And that is extremely risky to any organization. Cost savings are always up there at the top of concerns, and rightfully so. But cost savings doesn't translate to just value. You can't just say, if I spend X, I get this value for the organization. I've worked in too many organizations where we spend money on things and we do it because of the overall strategy of the organization, not necessarily because we're making money on this specific investment. It's just part of a defensible strategy, for example. Efficiencies is leveraging existing vendor contracts, for example, because we are managing this vendor now that's delivering IT services to us. Usability, making certain that these cloud services are what we actually need to make our businesses successful and meeting the end user requirements. Reduced risk. This is a specific concern of the entire organization. You see it come up mainly in IT security, which is rightfully so, they own it. But how do they know what their cloud service providers are doing? How do they know what's going on behind those walls? And then compliance. You have things like GDPR, you have HIPAA, you have privacy laws sprinkled throughout the world. How does the person in charge of compliance know that the vendor providing these IT services are actually meeting those requirements? I mean, before the cloud, if compliance officer of an organization had a question or an issue, they could take a walk to the IT data center, pick up a phone, fly out there, whatever it took to have that discussion. Imagine trying to do that simple little thing of communication, but now with a vendor. That's one of the major challenges we're faced with. So who should attend this course? Either of these courses? Well, the list is long. IT asset managers, certainly. Software asset managers who, in a lot of places in the world, are thinking that SAM is what you need to manage the cloud. And this course really will address why that isn't true or so. IT directors and managers, cloud administrators, security, procurement, finance, vendor managers. So all of these folks would benefit a lot from taking this certification course. Now, for both courses, what we're hoping to accomplish is, look, this is cloud asset management, and this is how it differs from other ITAM disciplines, such as software asset management. How cloud asset management fits into your existing ITAM program. How cloud assets can be managed from the financial risk, compliance, and efficiency perspectives. How to manage service providers. This is probably, in my opinion, the biggest change for the ITAM discipline. There's only one other practice within ITAM that is capable and doing vendor management, and that is the people in hardware asset management that are managing the ITAD or disposal vendors. And then how do we know we're ready for this and where are our weaknesses and strengths? Because yes, in this course, you're going to get information on how to assess your current position, which is critical. Course length. We have the CAM course. It's spanned typically over 2 days, 4 hours each day, giving somebody the opportunity to recover because an 8-hour day is just not a good thing. Certification exam is about an hour and a half long. It is open book. It's multiple choice. There are 100 questions, unlimited attempts to get it right. Passing score 100%. And before you go, oh my goodness, how are they going to do this? I'll tell you about that in a second. The SaaSum course is just 1 day for 4 hours. The exam is about 1.25 hours. It's again open book, multiple choice, 48 questions, unlimited attempts, passing score 100%. Now, here is the thing about the 100%. In my exams, I'm not there to test how well you memorize things and can just regurgitate them upon will. I'm not there to test you to see how well you can just memorize anything or know where to look for it. I'm there to help validate to you, the student, what you actually learned in this course. That's why the 100%. The exams are broken up into chunks associated with each part of the course, so that it's not like it's jumping all over the place. You go in there and you're going to have a learning experience when you take these exams. Course syllabus. So we're going to talk about the ITAM program here. We're going to define what is the scope of the IT Asset Management Program. And we're going to define ITAM and its key tools. Now, this may sound kind of redundant to some people, but there's a real good reason why we do this, and that's to level set what ITAM is. I've worked with over 2,000 asset managers. I've taught them ITAM, and everyone has a little bit of a different view of what asset management is. And I also expect non-ITAM people to come into this course. IT people, for example, or security people, or finance procurement people. So they may not really have a good idea of the scope of the ITAM program. There are 6 phases of an ITAM's or an IT asset's life, and these are the 6, starting with acquire. Within each of these phases are the key processes or the major processes that make up that phase. So we have acquire, we have receive, deploy, it's in use, recover, and the disposal of the asset. These are extremely critical to managing the entire life cycle of the asset. And you're going to see it gets a little bit more complicated when you start looking at platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. Looking back at cloud services, again, you have at the top software as a service sitting on top of platform as a service sitting on top of infrastructure as a service. You have these cloud clients, which could be a thin or thick client, meaning your Microsoft Word is your thick client, or you're actually doing Word from your browser, which is a thin client. You have multiple options for deploying the cloud assets, making it extremely more complicated. So we talk about the different ways you can deploy cloud services and how those different approaches may impact how you have to manage the actual cloud assets. Vendor tools. Vendor tools are first vendor tool I actually saw was the pricing tool, which made me think, this has got to get complicated. And guess what it does? Especially with infrastructure platform as a service, it's you pay for use, you pay for consumption, or you can make the decision that, you know what, I think I'm going to be using X amount of this particular resource in the next 6 months. I'm going to buy in advance because I get a discount. So same practice as other things in the past, but a little different, right? You really have to know and be able to plan appropriately and forecast what you think your consumption is going to be. So vendor tools have become a difficult, complex resource that can be very beneficial, provided you've taken the time to learn how to use them and you've taken the time to actually commit people to use them. Discovery, usage, and reporting tools that as asset managers and security personnel and IT people have relied on are now possibly ineffective, may not work. And we're going to talk about that in this course. Then we're going to talk about the importance of administration and configuration, because that's where the money can be spent. That's where the security risks come into play, which is extremely nerve-wracking for people in IT security. And you see a lot of breaches in that particular area. And then internal communication. Cloud is such an easy purchase today. I'm sure you sitting here watching this right now are using cloud services that you purchased yourself that were free. And maybe for personal use, but maybe even for corporate use, depending on the organization you work in, the company policies. Maybe you can bring your own device to work. And those types of expenses and risks that BYOD creates, for example, is something that we really need to have an understanding of. Now let's talk about SaaS asset management as separate from the cloud asset management. Now, the SaaS asset management piece to it, just as we talked about earlier, the life cycle is identical. I mean, again, this is life cycle. It can be applied to any IT asset type. We're going to look at, though, in SaaS, what are the reasons for adopting? Why are we going to this model? And then planning. In the planning phases for SaaS adoption, the people that have attended this course were amazed at the amount of effort that is really required to do this right. It is a new asset type. You can't deny that. You can't just say, well, it's just software. It's got software in the name. Why can't it just be software? Because it's software you're managing as a service, not as a product. CapEx versus OpEx, the challenges with there. We're going to look at how do we look at return on investment and total cost of ownership. And there's going to be some surprises, I think, when we look at total cost of ownership, because one of the things we look at is switching costs, which very few people take into consideration. Renewals, are they automatic? What is the term? How do you manage those renewals? Notifications from the vendor based on the contract. Vendors' own operations, and there's going to be some eyes opened in this particular area, because I think at this point in time, people have taken it's out of sight, out of mind, which when it comes to the risks associated with cloud, you can't outsource risk. You can outsource your IT data center, but you own the risk. Service level agreements are critical because they drive how you can manage, more importantly, how you can get feedback into the vendors for changes required for your own organization. User admin rights. What are the administration rights of each user? Can they just choose and pick and select whatever SaaS application they want to use? Or is there a process for controlling that? And then whose data is it? This is critical as well. We know that, for example, in Europe, GDPR protects a lot of people's personal data. Now you're taking that data and putting it into the cloud. Does the vendor share those risks? Do they share that interest in protecting that data as much as you do? And as I mentioned, switching strategy, which, believe me, personal experience can be very expensive. We're going to look at different examples. And this is one of the other things that the attendees have loved about this course, is we put up a scenario and then we walk through that scenario and how it's handled in each phase, each process of that cloud assets lifecycle. It's critical for them, the student, to have, look, this is what you should be doing. All right, let's look at an example of how we do it. The other piece to this, which is also, I think I had to sum up in one phrase, what is the primary difference between cloud asset management and all the other IT asset type that they get managed? It's vendor management. You have to manage the cloud service provider, the person delivering those assets to you. So we have example terms and conditions that should be in every cloud vendor's contracts. The scorecard, the reports that we should be getting from these vendors. They're critical for the transparency. Remember, I mentioned earlier, if you got an issue with your data center, you walk down to the data center, or you send somebody to fly them over there, or you pick up the phone call, or you have a meeting. Easy access. Not so easy access if it's being done by a third party. Much more challenging. So Looking at the vendor's behavior and controlling that behavior depends on what? The contract. The vendor scorecard, another scenario, another example. It helps people apply what they were just exposed to in the courseware. Now we're going to talk about the section here that only applies to what I call the IPaaS or Infrastructure Platform as a Service certification, the CAM certification. So CAM certification is IPaaS, which is IaaS, and PaaS plus what we just talked about, which was SaaS. First, we start out with, well, what do you have to offer from IPaaS? And it's extensive. I mean, if you look at this list, databases, virtual desktops, cost management, mobile, those are PaaS offerings that are delivered as a service that are charged for. And the extent of the charge is usually based on use and consumption. So somebody spins up a database, for example, for a project, they do the project and then they close the project and they forget to, spin down the database. The charges continue. Or recently, one of the security breaches, they spin up a database for testing, they bring in other vendors to help with stuff, they load in personal information, and it goes away and they totally forget to delete and wipe that database, spin it down and delete the data, and it's open for attack. So there's a lot of different things going on, a lot of moving parts. And we also look at configuration options for infrastructure as a service and how that's data center location, for example. There are certain industries that require the data center to be located within the country of business. We can't outsource our data center to another country. It's just not allowed by law. So this is another complexity. Remember, we had the life cycle of an asset. There's a tier 1 approach and a tier 2 approach. Tier 1 is your typical life cycle that I introduced earlier. When you get into IPaaS and cloud asset management, the in-use phase of tier 1 becomes an entire life cycle for tier 2. Here's an example. I'm in the in-use phase for an IPaaS. I spin up a database. Well, I've acquired the database, I've received it, deployed it, it's in use. It happens quickly. It's not your traditional IT asset where I make a request, ticket opens, the data center folks deploy a virtual server. On top of the virtual server, they put a database, they maybe apply a certain structure to the database, and then they close the ticket and you get informed it's done. And this happens, I don't know, hours or days. Now you've got IT doing these operations. I can go into a cloud service right now, Amazon, for example, and I can spin up a database in seconds. I'm an IT guy. I mean, I was a software engineer in my previous life, but it's in the hands of technical people who require some discipline. Asset identification now. So you saw all those different types of assets delivered as a service. How do we know they're there? So we talk about asset identification and tagging. FinOps is a very critical piece to cloud asset management, not any more critical than security or vendor management, but it certainly has the attention right now. It certainly has hype with it, but it's just one piece of the pie to managing the entire life cycle of the asset. We have to determine, what is an asset and from all these services that are available to us and how we're going to manage it. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the product life cycle. We're in the in-use phase, tier 1 of the IPaaS service. Now we're going into the life cycle of a specific product. The product life cycle phases are still very valid. Again, going back to that relational database that I've decided to spin up. Phases are going to be shorter. It takes me seconds, minutes. I've had pre-configured databases. Boom, it's up and running. So we have to look at a proactive versus reactive ITAM. And this sounds kind of disconcerting to some maybe, but it's critical because there is no way on this earth we're going to be able to tell an IT guy, you got to fill out a form, wait for approval, then you can spin up the database, blah, 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 blah. It's just not going to happen. They're going to bypass that. So we need to find very unique, creative ways to track what they're doing with pre-existing standards that we can then get reports on. And it's very, very doable. It's not that hard. So, with a reactive approach, it gives us an accurate, near real-time insight into what things are being used and consumed and by whom. But it requires very accurate tagging and reports. And I want to compare this cloud now to way back when, even before there was virtualization. If I needed a server with a specific operating system installed on it, I'd have to open up a ticket and make a request. If the server's not in stock, then we had to order one, and maybe it came in 2 days later, went through a receiving process, another couple of days, gets to IT, they actually open it up, verify that it's what we ordered, then they set a power up, reconfigure it, boom, it's ready, close the ticket. Days have gone by now to get a server. In the cloud, I spin up a virtual server in seconds or minutes. That's the big difference. With speed and all its benefits comes bigger risks. And again, this is what cloud asset management's trying very hard to take control of. The next thing we talk about are ITAM roles and processes. This is very critical as well. There are new roles that have to be addressed with new responsibilities. The ITAM processes that are listed here will be compared. When we're looking at these processes, we ask why, when, what roles are involved, what are the inputs and outputs, and are there any prerequisites? And that's for each of those. So we take a really close deep dive look into how ITAM changes. Now, software asset management in the IPaaS environment takes a big hit because the visibility we had was visibility into our own data center. We were able to launch and deploy whatever we wanted on there. We were able to educate our data center people. Look, you re-rack servers, or if you upgrade servers, it has an impact on our software licensing. That all changes now when all of that work can be done by a third party. We don't know if they know what our requirements are. So we have to have an assessment. Where is our current ITAM strengths at for software asset management? What are the current gaps in our own data centers? Because those gaps are just going to get transferred, and if not widened. SAM, the software asset manager, must manage software running on a third-party server configuration. That means change management is critical to us, because if the vendor, that cloud service provider, makes a change, we need to know how it impacts our software licensing. Software asset management needs to be involved in the contract negotiations for that cloud service provider. Just like in SaaS asset management and IPaaS, we go through a very long, detailed example of a fictitious company, of course, and this is the beginning of that. You see some of the text there. And we actually walk through all the processes, the roles, responsibilities, to see how we need to manage this asset. And again, we look at the specific terms and conditions, the scorecards of how do we manage the iPaaS vendor. And I can tell you that the iPaaS vendor is significantly more complicated to manage than the SaaS vendor. You require a lot more insight into what's going on in their operations than you did with SaaS. Scorecard, we walk through an example of that. How do we score the vendor's performance? And it's not just about uptime. It's about how they reacted to our requests. Did they send us valid and accurate reports? If they had an incident, did they report it in the appropriate amount of time? A lot of different information going back and forth. At the end of the day, we want a win-win. So this ends this particular part of the presentation that applies only to the CAM certification, okay? Now we're going to move on to talking about both certifications. Back to the presentation, disaster planning, and people may be surprised that it changes. There's actually 3 different plans that need to be developed for cloud disaster recovery planning. We talk about how and when. Disposal of replaced assets. I've run into organizations where they outsourced the data center, closed the data center, but didn't really schedule or appropriately manage the disposal of all the assets in that data center. The big ticket items like servers were easy, maybe network, but things like racks and any other type of networking equipment was totally forgotten about. So much to the surprise, they had some major issues when they were trying to close out a space that they were actually leasing. And then CAM and the ITAM hierarchy. We talked about this earlier. How does the Cloud Asset Manager fit into the ITAM hierarchy? And it's pretty clear its different role that it plays, but yet dependencies on other disciplines. Let's take a look at some frequently asked questions. What are the primary differences between SAM and CAM? Well, on one side, you're managing a product. SAM looks at managing the software product. CAM, on the other hand, well, they're managing a service that delivers a product, the software itself. SAM manages software compliance, whereas CAM is managing vendor compliance, the person delivering it. SAM manages the vendor primarily during purchase and support. Rarely have I seen the software asset manager holding frequent vendor management meetings. It's quite discerning because it is something that should be part of every SAM program. Cloud asset management requires managing the vendor during the entire lifecycle, from purchase to grave. The software asset manager is going to define terms and conditions for managing software license and its compliance. The Cloud Asset Manager defines terms and conditions for the service and for managing the vendor. Software Asset Manager defines software standards. Cloud Asset Manager defines service standards. What are the primary differences between FinOps and CAM? In FinOps, the primary focus is on financial. CAM focuses on financial compliance, risk, and efficiencies. FinOps evaluates assets based on dollars, pounds, euros, or other currency. CAM evaluates assets based on value. On FinOps, acquisition focus is driven by estimating cost. Acquisition focus is based on maximizing the value to IT, the service desk, IT security, legal, finance, the executives, end users, and everyone else. FinOps only manages existing IT assets, where CAM starts before acquisition and maintains asset information well past disposal. FinOps relies on ITAM processes for accurate spending numbers. CAM relies on finance for budgets, chargebacks, and taxations. My company outsourced the data center to a cloud service provider. Why should I care about how they manage their assets? After all, isn't that what I'm paying for? I think I mentioned this earlier. You can outsource IT. You cannot outsource the risk. This out of sight, out of mind syndrome is a very huge risk to many organizations. And it is happening. I've seen it happening, and all you have to do is look at cloud security breaches to become aware that they're not managing the cloud service provider. Or I should say, or they're not managing the consumers of the cloud services. What is the difference between the SaaS asset management and CAM certification courses? So the CAM certification courses covers the three primary architectures, SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. The SASM certification courses only addresses the SaaS layer. If you take the CAM certification, you do not have to take the SaaS asset management certification. So what are the course deliverables? Well, you get a comprehensive textbook. All of the information in there is mirrored to the presentation. So you also get a copy of the presentation. You get a spreadsheets that contain assessments for managing cloud assets and lists of terms and conditions that should be in every single cloud vendor contract. and you get certification upon completion and passing of the exam. Finally, in conclusion, cloud is a core technology in every business. It's in my business, it's in the biggest businesses, and everything, small, medium, as you can imagine. Cloud asset management has to be, just like ITAM, a core competency in every single business. You cannot run your business without IT. And if IT is in the cloud, you can't run your business without cloud asset management. Every dollar, every euro, every pound, every yen is touched by IT. The IT profession is lagging in adopting of IT, but the evidence is there to support the need for ITAM. This includes spending is not being managed. The organization has lost IT transparency in the cloud. It didn't even have it very well when it was on premise. IT security demands accurate IT asset inventory. Software still needs to be managed. And software is installed on hardware, which means, guess what? Hardware needs to be tracked. And perhaps even more of a challenge now is the IT budgets are being distributed to other departments so they can source their own cloud assets. Work from home has certainly spread things out. We have the Internet of Things rearing its ugly head. So if you don't have your arms around cloud layer, wait till you get to the fog layer, which is where you get Internet of Things. And then the ubiquitous internet and connectivity has left IT, and to some lesser extent, IT security, really well behind. Thank you. If you should have any questions about this course or anything else, please feel free to contact me at your earliest convenience. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Keep learning.